The autumn air in Oak Ridge was crisp enough to bite, the kind of cold that turns every breath into a ghost. In a quiet, tree-lined town like this, nothing major ever seemed to happen on the surface. People smiled at the grocery store, mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings, and pretended that everyone's life was picture perfect. But if you looked closely at the edges of the park just after 5 o'clock, when the shadows stretched long and dark across the empty playground, you could feel a different truth entirely. For older teenagers were slowly closing in on a small, pale freshman named Clara. They moved with the lazy, cruel confidence of predators who knew no one was watching. They thought she was weak. They thought she was an easy target, someone who would cry, surrender her bag, and run home trembling. They had no idea who she really was, or what she was carrying in the faded duffel bag slung over her thin shoulder. Clara pulled her oversized hoodie tighter around her neck, her pale fingers trembling slightly as she took a step backward. She was small for 14, with quiet brown eyes that seemed to constantly search the ground. To anyone looking at her, she was just the fragile new kid who sat in the back of the classroom and never spoke unless called upon. Her oversized clothes seemed designed to hide her, to make her vanish into the background. For 3 weeks, since she transferred to Oak Ridge High, she had managed to remain invisible. But visibility in a high school park late in the afternoon was dangerous. Standing in her path was Marcus, a 17-year-old senior with a cruel smirk and a reputation for making younger kids' lives miserable, flanked by 3 of his friends who laughed at every cruel remark he made. Marcus stepped forward, blocking the narrow dirt trail that led out of the park. He tossed a heavy wooden stick from hand to hand, looking down at Clara with patronizing eyes. He told her she was in their spot, that outsiders paid a toll to walk through the west side of the park, and that a pathetic little ghost like her didn't get a free pass. Clara didn't answer. She kept her chin tucked down, her chest heaving slightly, as if she were terrified. The 3 boys behind Marcus snickered, nudging each other as Marcus reached out and shoved Clara's shoulder, forcing her back against the rusted chain-link fence. Her heel caught on a tree root, and her duffel bag dropped onto the damp earth with a heavy, metallic thud that seemed out of place for a girl so small. What Marcus didn't notice, because he was too busy enjoying his power, was the way Clara's posture instantly shifted the moment her back touched that fence. Her weight centered. Her left foot slid backward 3 inches into a perfectly balanced stance, and her breathing suddenly smoothed out into a slow, rhythmic cadence. The trembling in her fingers stopped completely. Clara had spent 3 years of her life in dimly lit, sweat-soaked gyms, moving to the sharp cadence of leather hitting pads and a coach's sharp whistle. 2 years ago, before her world shattered, Clara was known as the lightning kid in the junior amateur circuit, a prodigy with an unbroken record and a punch faster than most adult competitors could track. Marcus reached down, grabbing the strap of her bag to kick it away, but as he leaned over, Clara's hand shot out with terrifying precision. She didn't strike him. Instead, her fingers clamped onto his wrist with a grip so dense and immovable that Marcus froze, his smirk instantly faltering. He tried to pull his arm back, but it felt like he was caught in a steel vise. Clara stared up at him, her quiet eyes no longer showing fear, but a cold, calculated stillness that made the blood run cold in his veins. She told him calmly to take his hand off her bag. The other 3 boys stopped laughing, sensing an unnatural shift in the air, but Marcus, embarrassed, growled and swung his free arm straight at her face. Clara didn't even blink. Her head slipped neatly to the left, letting Marcus's fist graze harmlessly through empty air. Before he could rebalance, her palm drove upward into his sternum with enough compressed power to knock the wind out of his lungs. Marcus stumbled back for paces, gasping for air, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. His friends stared in shock as this tiny girl stood over her bag, perfectly relaxed, her hands held low but ready. She had fought 42 formal matches against tough opponents, but she hadn't touched a pair of gloves in 12 months, not since the night her whole life tore apart. The 3 older boys took an instinctual step back, but Marcus, humiliated and furious, yelled at them to grab her. He insisted she was just lucky and demanded they surround her. As the boys closed in, Clara's mind flashed back to the small boxing gym in downtown Chicago where her father used to stand in her corner. Her father, a former light heavyweight contender, had taught her that boxing wasn't about hurting people. It was about distance, patience, and control. But more than anything, he had taught her that real strength was invisible until it was absolutely necessary. As the first boy lunged toward her, Clara stepped into his movement, slipping his wild punch and tapping his inner knee with her foot, sending him sprawling into the mud. Yet, despite her incredible skill, Clara wasn't fighting to win or to prove a point. Deep down, every muscle memory, every dodge, and every counter-strike pulled at an open wound in her heart. A year ago, Clara hadn't just given up boxing, she had run away from it. On the night of her biggest regional championship fight, her father had been driving them to the arena when an oncoming driver crossed the median. Clara had walked away from the wreckage with minor bruises, but her father had lost the use of his legs, ending his dream and shattering their family's livelihood. Clara had blamed herself ever since, believing that her pursuit of victory had placed them on that road at that exact second. She swore she would never throw another punch. Standing in the cold park, cornered by 4 high school bullies, Clara felt the intense conflict tearing her apart. Striking back felt like betraying the promise she made to herself after the accident. The second boy rushed her, swinging a heavy metal water bottle at her shoulder. Clara ducked under the swing, her instinct taking over before her guilt could stop her. She swept his leg and shoved him backward into Marcus, sending both boys tumbling to the ground. She picked up her bag, turning to leave, but Marcus scrambled to his feet, pulling a sharp folding pocket knife from his jacket. The metal clicked open with a sickening sound in the quiet park. The presence of the knife changed everything. Clara stopped walking. Her father had always told her that violence was a fire that consumed everyone involved if it wasn't contained. Looking at Marcus, whose eyes were full of reckless panic and pride, she saw someone who was heading down a dark, destructive path. A path she recognized all too well. Marcus lunged forward with the blade, swinging wildly. Clara didn't run. She stood her ground, her mind dropping into the hyper-focused state that had once made her a champion. She let the blade come within inches of her jacket before her hands moved like lightning, parrying his wrist outward and applying a joint lock that forced the knife from his fingers. The knife clattered onto the concrete path, and before Marcus could react, Clara had him locked in a standing armbar, completely immobilized. He whimpered in pain, his bravado instantly evaporating as he realized how helpless he was. The other boys stared in complete terror, unable to comprehend how a tiny freshman girl had single-handedly disassembled 4 older teenagers without taking a single scratch. Clara held Marcus firmly, her voice low and steady right next to his ear. She asked him why he felt the need to make people fear him, and if hurting others made him feel less alone. Marcus didn't answer, his body trembling from both pain and the shock of being completely outmatched. But as Clara looked into his eyes, she saw something unexpected beneath the anger and cruelty. She saw fear. It was the same hollow, desperate fear she saw in her own reflection every morning. At that moment, Clara realized that Marcus wasn't just a villain. He was a broken kid acting out his own pain on anyone smaller than him. The heavy burden of her past seemed to shift slightly, opening a door to an understanding she hadn't expected. She slowly released his arm and stepped back, leaving him standing there, breathing heavily in the cold air. Instead of running away or finishing the fight, Clara did something that shocked every boy in that park. She unzipped her worn duffel bag, reached inside, and pulled out a pair of old, faded red boxing gloves signed by her father. She set them gently on the wooden park bench beside them. She looked at Marcus and told him that real strength isn't built by keeping people down, but by bearing your own burdens without making the world pay for them. She told him her name was Clara, and that if he ever wanted to learn how to actually fight for something meaningful, he knew where to find her. The boys watched in absolute silence as Clara picked up her bag and walked away down the path. Word of what happened in the park didn't spread through the school like a typical rumor. It moved like a quiet whisper that changed the entire atmosphere of Oak Ridge High. Marcus stopped picking on younger students, dropping his aggressive act almost overnight. 2 weeks later, Clara walked into a small, dusty community center gym on the edge of town, a place where local kids went after school to stay out of trouble. Standing in the ring, holding a pair of focus pads, was her father in his wheelchair, smiling warmly at her for the first time in a year. Beside him, waiting patiently with his hands wrapped, was Marcus, ready to learn what it truly meant to be strong. Clara stepped into the ring, her heart lighter than it had been in a very long time. She had realized that running away from her gift didn't fix the past, but using it to protect and heal others could reshape the future. The gym filled with the sharp, clean sound of leather hitting leather, a rhythmic anthem of redemption, resilience, and second chances. In a world where so many people use their pain as an excuse to hurt others, the strongest people are those who turn their deepest wounds into a shield for everyone around them.